Hello everyone, and welcome to the August edition of the Farmer Supply Association Agriculture Report. I'm Randy Klepechka, agronomist with Farmer Supply Association. Well, August is always one of my favorite months, and that's because the season is finally starting to wind down a little bit. You know, harvest typically will start in August, and I think it will again this year. We probably won't have as much harvested in August this year as we typically do, but I think we'll have some rice and some corn both harvested this month. So certainly glad to get to this time of the year, glad to finally start winding this crop down and see how it's going to turn out. Looking at our crop situation right now, there's a wide range of development out there, and we've talked about that all year really. But looking at our rice crop, we've got rice that has just now reached the mid-season point, the internode just starting to move, just getting into that reproductive period. And on the other end of the spectrum, we've got rice where the heads have turned down, it's turning yellow. You know, we're really close to draining some, and again, certainly we'll harvest some by the end of the month. Looking at soybeans, again, another extremely wide range. We've got soybeans that were just planted within the last couple of weeks and just emerged within the last few days. On the other side of the spectrum, we've got soybeans, you know, that where the pods has reached full size and the soybeans within the pod are starting to expand. So, you know, a wide range of everything, so still a lot of management considerations to make at this time. I think our crop is going to be pretty good except for some of that extremely late planted stuff. Talking about our rice, I think we've had some pretty good temperatures during some of the pollination and grain fill period on the early planted stuff. So I think we have potential to have a good rice crop. Now some of the late stuff, you know, maybe has lost a lot of potential because it's just so late. Soybeans, real similar situation. Our soybeans that got planted in May and June, I think, are going to be pretty good. You know, we've got some timely rains now. We're starting to irrigate. We've had good temperatures, we've had sunshine. Those are all important for crop development. So, you know, I think except for those, once we got into, you know, July and started planting soybeans, obviously that potential is not very good at all. There's several things we need to talk about at this time of year. We're starting to wind down, but there's still some very important pest management issues, I guess you might say, we need to talk about. We're talking about insects and diseases, and also irrigations are some of the things we need to be looking at right now. So talking about insects, let's talk about rice first. Again, our big issue in rice is the rice stink bug. As usual, we started out with very high numbers of stink bugs. They've really started to trend down here lately. A couple of weeks ago when I made my first sweeps in Poinsett County, it was unbelievable. I actually got like 73 stink bugs per 10 sweeps. I had never seen anything like that in my entire career that I can remember, just extremely high numbers. We often see that with our early heading rice because the stink bugs tend to congregate on that. Just a little side note on that, I told the farmer to spray those, recommended spraying the next day, which was a Tuesday. Went out there to check again on Wednesday, and it was just incredible. I only found like one live stink bug in all my sweeps. So these insecticides, the Lambda and those kind of insecticides are incredible at knocking those numbers down. So they do a great job. And then once the headings really start spreading out and more rice starts heading, those stink bugs disperse and the numbers go down. Today we're taping actually on August the 5th, and I've checked some fields early this morning, and the numbers were really low. Checked some fields around here. We're in the Wiener area today, just north of Wiener, and the numbers were really low. There were several times that I made 10 sweeps and didn't get any stink bugs, and other times maybe one or two. So they've dispersed, and you know, again, the numbers are a lot lower, but we still need to keep watching our stink bugs in rice until we're about 60% hard dough or 60% color in that panicle. We can still get reinfested and have some more come in. We especially need to watch our late rice, but we need to watch all our rice until those heads are about 60% hard dough. And make treatments. After 2 weeks of heading, our treatment level goes up to 10 stink bugs per 10 sweeps versus 5 per 10 sweeps the first 2 weeks. So even though our stink bug numbers are down, let's keep watching for them. All right, now we'll turn to soybeans, and we've got one big insect that our main concern with soybeans are the corn earworms. We have not had big numbers of corn earworms yet. Part of that's probably because our soybeans are later this year, you know, developing later. They are starting to get some increased numbers down in South Arkansas. I heard a report from Gus Lorenz, extension entomologist, this morning talking about some pretty heavy flights down in South Arkansas, but very few treatments up in this part of the state. I've heard of a few in Cross County. But again, just not a lot of need to treat any corn earworm in this part of the state. What we do need to be doing is monitoring for the corn earworm, and I want to talk about something that's over here to my right. This is a corn earworm trap. It's a moth trap, and as you can maybe see in the top, we have a lot of moths trapped up in there. Let me show you how this works. There's a little rubber strip that we put in there that's pheromone that attracts those moths to the trap. We just clip it in there so the moths are attracted to that pheromone. They come in the bottom here and they fly up into the top, and they're trapped there. So what we do, by the way, this is provided by the Poinsett County Extension Office. Thanks to Craig Allen and Jeffrey Works for providing this for me so I can monitor that on a weekly basis. But I'll come out here every Friday, take that top off. Usually sometimes I might need to use an insecticide to knock them down, but I'll take that top off and we'll count how many are in there. And we don't base a treatment on how many moths are in there, but we do. That gives us an idea if there's a heavy moth flight, if it's increasing from one week to the next. But again, we don't need to spray a moth. A moth is not going to do any damage, but from that moth, eggs are laid, and then larvae can hatch out from those eggs, and they can migrate to soybeans and get to the size where they can damage the soybeans. So that's what we're doing with this. You may see these out in the country every once in a while, and that's what it is. That's a corn earworm moth trap. Once we do start seeing increased numbers in those moth traps, what we'll do is we'll get our sweep nets out. We'll start sweeping fields and seeing if we actually are getting larvae increasing out in the field. So if we get certain numbers, certain sizes, we'll start spraying for them. A couple of different types of insecticides we use. There's a new biological insecticide I want to talk about today, and then we've got our traditional chemical insecticides. This biological insecticide is called heligen. It's a living virus, and there's a couple of things we have to do differently when we use this living virus. First, we have to spray our worms a lot earlier. The treatment level for the worms, if you're going to use the heligen or the living virus, is 5 or less small larvae per 10 sweeps. And once we get using other insecticides, it'll be more. But again, with the heligen, if we get 5 or less small larvae, less than a ½ inch long, then we can use the heligen as our treatment material for our corn earworms. A couple of things about the heligen. Again, you've got to catch the worms early. You can't wait and scout later, so we've got to catch them early when they're very small and very low numbers. It's a living virus again, so we have to keep it cool. We don't just throw it in the back of the truck or inside your truck where it's going to get hot or anything like that. We need to keep it below 77 degrees so that the virus can remain living and work. So that's something we got to remember if we want to think about using this. It's very effective. All the tests have shown it to work very well. It's been in the field to some extent the last couple of years and worked very well. So again, if you want to think about using this, and it's very economical, we need to catch the worms early and keep that virus maintained in a good area and not let it get too hot or anything like that. So if you want to think about that, that's a good method of control. If we're not going to use that, or if the worms just get too big before we see that we have a treatment level out there, then we go to our traditional chemical insecticides, like our Prevethon, our Besiege, even our pyrethroids such as Karate and generics and things like that can be effective. But we do have a sliding scale to determine our economic threshold on those. We take into account the price of the treatment of the insecticide, and we take into account the price of the crop, the price of soybeans right now to determine what our treatment threshold is. So for example, if you're using one of the cheap materials, one of the generic pyrethroids, it only costs $1 or $2 per acre to use, then our treatment threshold is much lower because it doesn't take as much to recover that amount of money that you're spending. So our treatment level, if you're looking at those cheap materials, is down actually about 6 or 7 worms per 25 sweeps. On the other hand, if we're using one of our insecticides like Prevethon or Besiege, that are a little more expensive. They're more expensive, but generally they do provide quite a bit more residual, and they also generally are more consistent on their control. So they're more expensive for a reason. But if we're using those more expensive insecticides, then our treatment level goes up to about 11 or 12 per 25 sweeps. So again, your treatment level is going to be based on the price of the crop and also the insecticides you're using and how much it costs. But all of these materials can be effective. The heligen can be effective, the Prevethon and the Besiege are effective and do provide you residual. And again, generally the pyrethroids, the generic pyrethroids and such, they're not quite as consistent, but I do see good results a lot of times, but they're not quite as consistent, and they provide pretty much no residuals. So, you know, just kind of pick what you want to use. They can all be effective if used in a proper way. But so that's kind of where we're at right now. A couple other things. Irrigation termination on rice. We're getting to that point right now. As I mentioned, some of our rice is that far along. There's a lot of different methods out there. When I first started being a county agent, what I always learned was if the end grains are brown and if the base grains are milky, then you're probably safe to terminate irrigation and drain at that point. Looking at university recommendations, they say on our silt loam soils, if you've got about 2/3 of the panicle is brown and dried up, you know, and hard dough, then you can go ahead and drain. If it's clay soils, you only about 1/3 of that panicle needs to be brown and hard dough to drain. So. And also looking at the DD50 program, it's based on 25 days after 50% heading. If you know, at that point you can drain it according to that. For long grains, for medium grains, they take a little bit longer to dry down. So the recommendation on the DD50 there is 30 days after 50% heading. So a lot of different, you know, ways of expressing that drain date, but all of those are pretty darn close when it comes down to it. So if you got any questions on any of that, feel free to contact me through Farmers Supply Association, and hopefully next month we'll be talking about some yields. This has been Randy Klepechka with your August edition of the Farmers Supply Association Agriculture Report.